Another kick in the wallet for homeowners, with interest rates looking set to rise this lunchtime. What is this going to mean for you? And is the cost of mortgages approaching its peak? Let's hope so.
Don't lecture us on morality. The government hits back at the Archbishop of Canterbury after he called the immigration bill, the Stop the Boats policy, morally unacceptable.
And cries of betrayal from Brexiteers as Rishi Sunak shreds his promises to shred EU laws. We're going to be discussing if this is a victory for the Westminster blob. All to come on To The Point. Get involved with our conversations this morning. Let us know your thoughts on all of the above. We've also got some fantastic stories that we're going to be discussing with our guests this morning as well. But first of all, here is your news with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you. Good morning. It's just gone 9:30. Your top stories in the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's widely expected to raise interest rates for a 12th consecutive time later as it tries to tackle soaring inflation. Economists predict the base rate will increase by 1/4 percentage point from 4.25 to 4.5%. The rise would take interest rates to the highest level since 2008. Rail services run by operator TransPennine Express are to be brought under government control. The Transport Secretary has announced the decision follows continuous cancellations. Mark Harper says the firm's contract won't be extended nor renewed. The Department of Transport will instead take over from May the 28th. The train operator, which covers Northern England and runs in parts of Scotland, saw 1 in 6 services cancelled in March. Adam Price has announced he's quitting as leader of Plaid Cymru. The decision comes just days after a review found a culture of sexual harassment, bullying and misogyny in the Welsh Nationalist Party. It found the party had failed to implement a zero-tolerance approach to sexual harassment and that women especially had been let down. Mr Price has apologised and says recommendations to detoxify the party will be taken on board. And former US President Donald Trump says he'd pardon many supporters for their involvement in the January the 6th Capitol riots if he wins the next election. Speaking at a CNN town hall in New Hampshire, he also refused to acknowledge he lost the 2020 election. The debate was also the first time he's been publicly seen since a jury found him guilty of sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll in the 1990s. He continues to deny ever meeting the magazine writer. TV online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Beth.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us here on To The Point on GB News. Now, ministers have clashed with the Archbishop of Canterbury after he attacked the government's illegal migration bill as being morally unacceptable.
So Justin Welby said the legislation had too many problems for one speech. He warned it would damage the UK's standing in the world.
So earlier, Parliamentary Under Secretary Sarah Dines told GB News the people traffickers are the immoral ones.
Well, I respect it very much, and the House of Lords is a really precious, important part of our Constitution. However, with the greatest respect, I don't agree with what he said. I just don't think it is moral to allow people such as traffickers to bring people, including children, across the Channel, risking their lives for money. I mean, that's what it is, and that's where the immorality lies.
Well, I agree with the junior minister, and we've got Lord Marland here, a former minister, of course. Lord Marland, you heard some of the debates yesterday. Welby, it's outrageous to say it's morally repugnant to bring in this bill. Isn't it morally repugnant to allow the people smugglers to ply their vile, evil trade across the Channel?
Well, I think he's entitled to his views. We all are in a country of free speech. I'm not sure there's great resonance and support for his views. No. Certainly it wasn't in large parts of the chamber. And I was struck, Andrew, by one of the things he said was it undermines international cooperation. I've spent the last... I've done God knows how many flights this year around the Commonwealth countries in my role there. And I've not come across any lack of international cooperation. I was in Rwanda, of course, earlier in the year, as you know, and I'm struck of how, Rwanda would be an incredibly good place to end up if you were a migrant. It's a modern very clean city, and a place where it takes law and rule of law, you know, incredibly importantly. And I was talking to Lord Dobbs, and I thought he put it so well. I'm reading it here. They trade in lies and they trade in lives.
Yes.
And I think the great majority of British people are really frightened by the huge amount of immigrants that are coming into the country.
I agree.
The way that they're coming in. And I think we're about to see figures which will blow the doors off immigration. And unless we get to grips with this, then we are really in trouble.
It must be frustrating for you as a Brexiteer to know that one of the reasons many people voted for Brexit was to curb immigration, given that we struggle for school places, GP places. We feel that we're not getting the service from our taxpayers' money at the moment. To see these figures now higher than they ever were before Brexit.
Well, I didn't personally, it wasn't an issue for me, Brexit, as Brexit. Mine was more economic than this. I think the interesting thing is that you've not heard a squeak out of anybody of all the Hong Kong people we've taken in, which were legitimate refugees.
Yeah.
You know, we are a compassionate nation. We are a multicultural nation, a very tolerant nation, and I think we've got a very good record of welcoming people into this country. But what we're saying is you can't come in illegally, and frankly, you know, we're not allowed to break the law, so why should we others break the law? And I think you know, the church has entered into this ring of debate, and I think they'll find increasingly that they're detached from what most of their parishioners are thinking about.
The few they've got left, that is.
And, well, you said Andrew, I mean, it is a diminishing audience, unfortunately. And I think this is a shame.
You're good mates with Boris Johnson. The Mail reported this week that Geeta Harry, who was Boris's press secretary, said there was a stand-up fight between Boris and the King, when he was Prince of Wales, actually in Rwanda at a Commonwealth summit last year. Do you know much about that?
Well, you do like stitching me up on this programme. I thought you were friends.
Yeah.
Well, we did
well, I was in
before we came. Well, Jonathan might have an opinion on that.
Yeah.
I was in Rwanda for that event, and my sense is, and I saw the two together, and there wasn't any. I think Guito was probably stretching it a bit. Clearly, the Prince of Wales, or then Prince of Wales, now our great King, has views on this subject. One thing's for certain, he would never tell anyone his views on the subject. And I think Boris has denied that this thing happened. I'm sure there probably was a conversation, but it had been done privately between the two of them, and neither of them rightly are describing the events around it. But the King would have seen, as did Boris, that Rwanda, Kigali, the capital, is an incredible place. I mean, it is extraordinary. People go out every Saturday and clean their neighbourhood for 3 hours by law. It's an extraordinary developing country, and it's got a wonderful climate, and it's a very modern city. And I think you know, we at our peril criticise countries like this. Because I think it's an extraordinary place.
Can we ask you about the Brexit laws? But now Rishi Sunak pledged a bonfire of these laws. 4,000 of them were going to go by December the 31st. Kemi Badenoch, the Secretary of State, now said yesterday, or she's saying it today, more like 600. That's a real letdown.
Well, it is a big letdown because the Brexit dividend, in my view, has always been to have 10% lower tax than our competitors, basically Europe and the United States, and 10% less regulation. And we're going in the wrong direction on both, which is going to make it very difficult for our economy in the future to get any growth out of the economy. This is, you know, just another step in that direction. You kind of do think that the forces of Brexit, of Remain, actually not Brexit, but Remain, and the forces of pro-Europe are at play in a lot of activity at the moment in the civil service.
She said she couldn't cope with the civil service intransigence on the issue.
Well,
she just gave in.
Yes, and it is actually very difficult to repeal laws. When I was in government, we had to get rid of 33% of our laws. That was the coalition initiative. And you can get rid of the first 10% like that because they're redundant, moribund, etc. When you start getting into the next lot, it's real trench warfare because you've got to get it through. You're going to have a discussion with your civil servants, many of which would have put the laws in themselves, so you're pushing water uphill in that regard. And then, of course, you've got to get it through Parliament if you're going to repeal things. So it's not easy, but you have to work very hard at it. I think what's for the future, Francis Maud, who I had a long conversation with last night, has been tasked with this review of the civil service. And it'll be very interesting to see what he comes up with in this review. He tells me he's 8 months pregnant, so in a month's time he'll come out with the review. It's taken up a lot of his time. He, of course, ran the Cabinet Office for a long time, was partly responsible for civil service reform. I obviously am not going to give anything away that he said to me, but he said, I think he shares most people's view that the system isn't working.
It's the blob.
We're going to keep you with us for a minute, if you don't mind.
Well, not if you're going to ask me awkward questions.
I've got one more question I want to ask you.
We're also going to be talking to Sir Vince Cable, of course, the former Lib Dem leader coming
who
into the studio.
I worked with.
Yeah, of course you did, in coalition, and talk about is Labour and the Lib Dems, are they going to do a pact?
That's right, we'll keep you there, Jonathan, just for now. So the Bank of England is predicted to raise interest rates for the 12th time in a row today, to their highest level since 2008.
It's all about battling inflation. Experts believe the base rate will rise by 0.25% to 4.5%.
But how will this further uptick affect the hospitality industry? Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, is at the Red Lion pub in Lincolnshire. Good morning, Will. What are the pub owners telling you there?
Good morning. Yes, when you think of interest rates, you think ultimately about mortgages and loans, the amount of money that people are going to have to be paying back. But it's also about the amount of money that people have left over once they've made those payments. And where does that money go? Well, for a lot of people, it goes down the pub, whether it's for a nice meal at a country pub like this or for a few beers. Simon, you're the business owner of the Red Lion here in Caythorpe near Grantham. Just describe for me, what's the last year or so been like for your part of the industry?
Difficult. Difficult in a couple of ways, really. You've seen food and beer prices rise by more than 10%, and people's leisure spend has been depleted because of the increase in their mortgages and what you just said, people's loans, etc. I also think new people, the younger generation, who are trying to get a mortgage, who are trying to find money to buy their first house or whatever it might be, are finding it really tough. So therefore, they've got less money in their pocket, and therefore they've got less to spend down at the pub.
Today, the headlines are about interest rates. The Bank of England says they raise interest rates to try and bring down inflation and slow the price rises. Just describe for me those price rises for you, and how are you trying to manage those difficult price rises, inflation running at 19% at the moment for food?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly all food products have gone up by more than 10%. People talk about 10%, but it's actually a lot more. For example, recently, we've had to put 35 pence onto the price of a pint because that's what the brewery have put the price up to us, and we're trying to maintain our margins.
And roast dinners, this is a country pub, full on a Sunday, but how are those affected?
Well, look, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, we were charging £15 for a main course. We're now at £18 for a main course, £18.50. So, and that is because our local suppliers that we support have got increased costs, energy, for example, and therefore we've had to put our prices up to reflect that.
In the outlook for the next year, for a pub that seems to be doing quite well, how does the industry as a whole look as we go into the next year with hopefully some continually lowering energy costs, the effects of the pandemic, and hopefully the war in Ukraine starting to temper a little bit? Is it a good outlook for the next year or so?
Well, look, fingers crossed, energy will continue to come down. It's certainly halved for me in this next period, this next year. Food at the moment isn't coming down. That's remaining quite high. I think those that are in wet sales only and not doing food are going to find this quite difficult. Those that are doing food, I think, will, with a positive stance, will weather that storm.
The pub isn't open yet. We also don't have the interest rate figures, so we're sticking around here all day. Those interest rate figures come out at 12 o'clock on the dot. So we'll be in this pub also hearing from the customers who've come for their lunch to see how the interest rate figures are affecting them.
Thank you, Will. Thank you. Yeah, bleak times, isn't it?
Certainly is. Now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, refused to rule out 12 times in interviews the other day the possibility of doing a deal with the Lib Dems at the next general election. The former Lib Dem leader is with us in the studio, Sir Vince Cable, with us now. Since you wrote about this yesterday, if it's going to be a hung parliament, Labour would very likely to do a deal with your party.
Well, I think they would be looking... They may win an overall majority,
yes.
of course, that's possible.
Yeah.
They may not win at all. I mean, we're dealing with hypothetical situations. Yeah. But there is one set of circumstances in which Labour don't have an overall majority. And I think if they have any sense, they will be looking for a period of 5 years stable government rather than living from hand to mouth, in which case they would need the cooperation of other parties. I think they would be very foolish to lean to the SNP or the DUP, and that leaves the Lib Dems, who I think, I don't know the internal thinking, I'm not part of it, but I think the thinking is that we would want to be responsible and provide good government, as indeed we did with the coalition 10 years ago.
And what would the price be? Would it have to be a deal on proportional representation?
Well, I think if there was a cooperative agreement, then there is a whole lot of policy issues that would come into play. And I think one of them would be electoral reform, which matters not just for our own self-interest, but in terms of having a fairer, wider voting system. So that would be important, but it can happen in different ways, and there are other issues. Radical decentralisation is an issue that's very much on the agenda, rebuilding our links with the European Union, and all of these things are matters for the new government that we would potentially try to influence, but not, I think, as a coalition. I think that's unlikely, though Ed Davey wisely hasn't ruled it out.
You were in the coalition government. You were a Secretary of State in the coalition government. It was a pretty bruising outcome for the Lib Dems in the end. You were almost obliterated in the 2015 election.
It was. I think the formula most people would agree with is that we provided very good government for 5 years, but it was very bad for the party. Good for the government, good for the country, but not good for the party. The reason we ultimately lost, and as a acutely observing journalist, you would have noticed this, and what really did us harm was the fear in 2015 of Red Ed on the Scottish nationalists. I don't think the Conservative campaign would work again in that way. So I think probably we'll be less damaged. But coalition isn't good for small parties. Yeah.
Why do you think the Lib Dems did so well, Vince, in the local elections? Because the feeling is that Lib Dems make very good local constituency MPs and councillors, but they can't make that reach nationally.
Well, I think, the whole point about the coalition government was it defeated that argument. We actually were very good in government. We had good ministers, influenced a lot of policies in a good way. So, we've had that exposure at national level. That's not a plausible argument anymore. The reason we did well was good local campaigning. We've run most of the big cities of Britain at some time. We're now very strong in the south of England and some outposts in the north, like Hull. So partly local, but partly disaffection with the government, which is very intense. And a lot of tactical voting in our support.
I was going to say about the tactical voting, there was a lot of that. Do you think at the general election, the Lib Dems should stand aside in some seats where they know they can't win to let Labour perhaps defeat the Tories, and vice versa, Labour stand aside in seats where you can beat the Tories?
I don't think there's any question of parties standing aside. The Lib Dems and Labour, I'm sure, will put up a full slate of candidates. But what happened in 1997, when the Labour Paddy Ashdown landslide happened, was that there was a sort of general understanding that you concentrate your resources in those seats which you can win, which is you have to do under the first-past-the-post system. And we did very well. We doubled our numbers, more than doubled our numbers, and Labour under Blair got in with a massive majority. So I think a repetition of 1997 tacit understandings is very much on the cards.
Let's bring Jonathan in, because Lord Malik, you were his junior
I
minister.
served under the reign of terror of Vince, yes, for several months. But actually, funny enough, I was talking to a couple of very strong Tories yesterday, and they both said that we've never been as good as since the coalition. And of course, Vince and I are bound to say that because we were in the coalition government. But it was a great pleasure working. I originally started working with Chris Huhne as his number 2 in energy, and he was really good to work with. You know, people like Alexander and Vince, I thought, were excellent in what they did. And the interesting thing about the next election is, you know, where is the division? We're looking like 2 social democratic parties, or 3 actually. And, you know, what's the choice? And maybe the choice actually will be that we go into a Tory Lib Dem coalition again, but I suspect there's Bruce. Actually, I worked for Ed for a month.
Ed Davies,
yeah. So
could they do that again?
I'm not sure who this third Social Democratic Party is. Are you thinking of the Tories?
No, I'm thinking Labour and the Tories and the Social.
Oh no, well that's a bit of a stretch.
And the Liberal Democrats. I think we've all become Social Democrat parties.
Well, I think the differentiation is much stronger than that. No, I think nothing can be ruled out, nothing should be ruled out, but the chances of a Conservative Lib Dem coalition again are vanishingly small, I think.
No, I think that's right. I think I was being slightly mischievous. But
if there is a Labour Lib Dem coalition, Jonathan, and they do push through electoral reform, what would that mean for the Conservatives?
It would be bad news for Labour and the Conservatives, proportional representation.
Worse for the Conservatives, though, right?
Who knows? I mean, I think that I still don't rule out Rishi winning the next election. I think he's, if he can deliver on the 4 or 5 things that he's set out, and that we see taxes being reduced, inflation coming down, immigration being dealt with, then I think people will say, my choice between 2 Social Democrats of Starmer and Sunak, we might continue to stick with the devil we know, in a sense. And he's really brought some steadiness back into government, which is what the nation needs. So I don't rule him out winning again. In fact, I've got a bet on it. So, what
were the odds?
7 to 1.
And how much did you put on?
I better not tell you.
I know, but I won't say, as you told me. Let's get Vince on to PR, though, Vince.
Did you put any money on that, Vince?
I mean, PR, the Tories will project it. If you vote Labour, or if you vote Liberal Democrat, we're going to have potentially a hung parliament and a proportional representation, which is a recipe for chaos and bad government. You look at Italy, governments every other year. Why do you think PR would be so much better for the way the country's going?
Well, I didn't use the phrase PR.
No.
PR is one particular version.
Well, you tried AV last time, and that didn't work.
We clearly need electoral reform. There are different ways of doing it. The Jenkins report that was commissioned under Tony Blair gave a very good formula that I think meets the British tradition of constituency MPs with additional top-ups. It's more the German model. I mean, that would work, but, you know, that remains to be explored. It certainly isn't a recipe for chaos. I mean, you may or may not like what the German coalition is doing, but they're very stable, and most of the successful Western European governments are coalitions of some form or the other. So it's certainly nothing to be frightened of. I think we're not talking about actually a coalition after the next election. I think it's very unlikely. But if that is the long-term outlook, we should embrace it.
I want to ask you one last question, because I know he's a good friend of yours. Rumour is Boris Johnson is going to stand as the MP for Henley-on-Thames at the next election. Can you confirm or deny that rumour, Lord
I can't confirm or deny that rumour at all, because I have no first-hand knowledge of it. I think the first thing is he's got to get through this scrutiny committee report, and depending on the outcome of that, I mean, the scrutiny committee is outrageous, I think, but that's an aside. When he gets through that, I'm sure he'll want to continue in his own constituency. Of course, Henley would almost certainly love to have him back. because he is a vote winner.
Yeah.
Can we just, Sir Vince, one last question on the Rwanda bill? The Archbishop of Canterbury yesterday said it's morally repugnant. The Lib Dems, Lord Paddock, tried to kill the bill stone dead with something called a fatal motion. That's not what the Lib Dems should be doing in Parliament. This bill has gone through the Commons. It's supposed to be revising in the House of Lords, not killing bills.
Well, Lord Paddock is one of our most conscientious and effective lords, as it happened, but I wouldn't have Lord Paddock or Lord Marland or the Archbishop of Canterbury making laws. I mean, I would get rid of the House of Lords and replace it with a more representative institution.
You're out then, Jonathan.
I thought we were friends, you know.
So you don't think that was the right move by Paddock?
Well, the House of Lords, as it is presently structured, is a revising chamber. I understand. If I were in the House of Lords, I'm not, and I no wish to be, but I think I would want to use it to its maximum extent, which is what Lord Paddock's doing. So I understand what the guy's up to, and it's perfectly
Did
reasonable.
nobody ask you to join the House of Lords? As a former cabinet minister?
It was suggested in 2015 when I lost my seat, but I thought it was more important to win my seat back into Parliament, which I did, and I've now got a separate career.
Right. So you're not interested in going back into the House of Lords?
No.
All right. You heard it here first. That's Lord Sir Vince Cable.
Thank you both. Thank you. Right, still to come, the Bank of England is set to announce its latest interest rate decision. And we're going to be looking at how it could affect the pound in your pocket. This is To The Point on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth from the Met Office. Now today, after a brighter start, we will see some showers breaking out and a risk of thunderstorms once again. The reason it's been quite so unsettled is because we've got low pressure that's bringing some quite unstable air across the UK throughout today, but things will start to settle down as we head into the weekend. So some sunshine first thing across central and southern areas of England, as well as central and western areas of Scotland, but by lunchtime, we will start to see some pretty heavy downpours breaking out. Another risk of thunderstorms, particularly across the eastern side of the country, where the rain could last for quite a while and lead to some quite large puddles and surface water flooding as well. Though in any sunshine away from the showers, particularly across western areas, it will feel warm, highs of 16 or 17 degrees later on. Then through this evening, things will turn much drier and we'll start to see our winds shift, and that's going to drag in some low cloud from the North Sea. So quite a misty and murky night to come tonight, particularly over any coastal areas and high ground, but temperatures again around average for the time of year by the time we get to tomorrow morning. So quite a misty start tomorrow, apart from across the far western areas where we'll see some sunshine from the get-go. The cloud will burn back through the afternoon. However, many eastern areas will stay quite cool and cloudy throughout much of the day. And so temperatures here will be slightly suppressed, closer to 11 or 12 degrees. However, in that sunshine, feeling more like 17 or 18 degrees. Now that warm weather will become more widespread for Saturday as we see a good amount of sunshine across the country. But the next batch of rain will arrive from the west on Sunday. Have a lovely day.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess I've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 11th of May. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Now, another kick in the wallet for homeowners, with interest rates looking set to rise again this lunchtime. Why, and what is it going to mean for you? The cost of mortgages must surely be approaching a peak.
And cries of betrayal from Brexiteers. Rishi Sunak has dumped that promise to ditch 4,000 EU laws by the end of the year. They're just going to get rid of 600. Another victory for the Whitehall-Westminster blob.
But Europe couldn't seem any stronger in Liverpool. And with Eurovision fans descending to its streets, we're going to catch up with a former winner to discuss the impact of music's showpiece event. All to come on To The Point.
I love Eurovision.
I was just going to say to you, do you like it? What? That doesn't surprise me.
I turn the volume down for most of the songs and enjoy the voting.
What?
The voting is the fun, and particularly if Britain gets 0 points.
You don't listen to the songs?
No, most of them are terrible. Terrible.
Anyway, right, let us know your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk. If you also listen to the Eurovision Song Contest with the sound turned off, do let us know.
Yeah.
But first of all, here are your news headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 10. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's widely expected to raise interest rates for a 12th consecutive time later as it tries to tackle soaring inflation. Economists predict the base rate will increase by 1/4 percentage point from 4.25 to 4.5%. The rise would take interest rates to the highest level since 2008. The head of financial analysis at AJ Bell, Danny Hewson, says it's an incredibly worrying time for mortgage holders, especially those on the standard variable rate.
They have seen thousands of pounds of additional costs piled upon them. The big question, of course, though, is where does it go next? And certainly at the moment, markets are anticipating at least one more interest rate hike of about 1/4%, but potentially interest rates going all the way to 5% towards the summer.
And ahead of another predicted rise in interest rates, Labour's accused Rishi Sunak of being personally responsible for what it's branded a £1 billion Tory mortgage penalty. Households have paid over £1 billion in higher mortgage payments since Liz Truss's mini-budget last year. That's according to Labour's analysis of research by the Resolution Foundation think tank. But the party claims the blame also lies with the Prime Minister, who they say left Britain with a high tax burden when he was Chancellor. According to consumer group Which, almost 750,000 households missed their rent or mortgage payment last month. Rail services run by operator TransPennine Express are to be brought under government control. The Transport Secretary has announced the decision follows continuous cancellations. Mark Harper says the firm's contract won't be extended nor renewed. The Department of Transport will instead take over from May the 28th. The train operator, which covers Northern England and runs in parts of Scotland, saw 1 in 6 services cancelled in March. Adam Price has announced he's quitting as leader of Plaid Cymru. The decision comes just days after a review found a culture of sexual harassment, bullying and misogyny in the Welsh Nationalist Party. It found the party had failed to implement a zero-tolerance approach to sexual harassment and that women especially had been let down. Mr Price has apologised and says recommendations to detoxify the party will be taken on board. And in the last few minutes, we can confirm Llŷr Griffith has been nominated as the acting leader, subject to ratification by the Parry Council on Saturday. Former US President Donald Trump says he'd pardon many supporters for their involvement in the January the 6th Capitol riots if he wins the next election. Speaking at a CNN town hall in New Hampshire, he also refused to acknowledge he lost the 2020 election. The debate was also the first time he's been seen publicly since a jury found him guilty of sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll in the 1990s. He continues to deny ever meeting the magazine writer.
Just so you understand, ready? I never met this woman. I never saw this woman. I have no idea who this woman is. This is a fake story, made-up story. We had a horrible Clinton-appointed judge. He was horrible. He allowed her to put everything in. He allowed us to put nothing in.
Mr. President,
this is a
you're
fake
recounting your version
story.
of events.
The Prime Minister has angered Conservative Brexiteers by scrapping the government's pledge to remove thousands of EU laws by the end of the year. Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch says only 600 will now be revoked from the UK statute book instead of the proposed 4,000. Labour's branded the move a humiliating U-turn from a divided government. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who introduced the plans, has accused Rishi Sunak of abandoning his promise.
Words and his deeds are not matching. That is a dangerous position for a Prime Minister to be in. The 2019 manifesto that people like me got elected on is not being followed. Brexit, that was meant to be safeguarded by this, is now being blocked by Remainers in the House of Lords and weakness coming from ministries. This seems to me to be a real blow to Brexit, a problem for Brexit, not delivering on what we want and not giving us the fruits of deregulation that we voted for.
The number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen to a new record high. According to NHS England, an estimated 7.3 million people were waiting to start treatment in March. That's up from 7.2 million in February. It's the highest number since records began in August 2007. And Canada has unveiled its new passport design with more security features and a nod to our newly crowned king. It's the first passport in the Commonwealth to mention the new monarch, but the coat of arms it displays is in fact the Queen's, as the new version was created before King Charles approved it. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Bev and Andrew.
Oh, grim tidings, I'm afraid. The Bank of England predicted to raise interest rates for the 12th time in a row today to their highest level since 2008.
As it continues to battle inflationary pressures, experts believe that the base rate will rise by 0.25% to 4.5%.
Well, we're going to speak now to the Deputy Editor of the online publication CapX, Alice Denby. Alice, very depressing.
I mean, it is, but I think this was broadly baked in. I think people are expecting this, and I think, frankly, people are expecting it to go still higher. But it's obviously a worry to people who are on variable mortgages, for example, and I think that the biggest consequence that people will feel is if this does tip the economy into recession, because that is going to make everybody poorer.
And we've already got the highest tax burden in the country. For 70-odd years. Interest rates are now higher in this country than a lot of other countries.
And as you say, inflation also is running at something like 10% on the everyday essentials that people need. So every household in the country is feeling this. But the problem is, if we do go into recession, if we go into negative growth, that is terrible for the long-term prospects of this country. We've been through an extended period of extremely sluggish growth. And if we go backwards, that's a nightmare for the future. And frankly, it doesn't feel at the moment like the government has the kind of innovative policies we need to get us back to growth.
Is the policy working? They keep putting interest rates up and inflation is still in over 10%.
I mean, I think these things sometimes take a while to feed through. There are some economists who say that the Bank of England is being too hasty, that in fact inflation is very likely to come down anyway. I think gas prices are already falling. But there's so much uncertainty. So much depends on what happens in Ukraine. So, I mean, there is an argument that perhaps the Bank of England could be a bit more cautious. I think a lot of economists also blame the Bank of England for being way too slow to respond, for printing far too much money during the pandemic and for not seeing this crisis coming.
Yeah. 12th rise in a row, though, Alice. Do you genuinely think this will be the last one? Because homeowners who are on variable mortgage rates cannot cope with any more going out of their bank accounts every month.
I think it's highly likely that this won't be the last one. I think there are certain expectations baked in already. Yeah. But in fact, you know, just to reassure some mortgage holders, the borrowing rate really depends more on expectations than the rate rise. So given that people are expecting it to go higher, they shouldn't maybe worry so much about a change.
And they never seem to put up the interest rates on your savings account as quickly. I mean, they always lag behind, Alice.
Yes, indeed. I think a lot of consumers find that very difficult to understand, and I think it's got a lot to do with how banks operate.
Ripping us off. That's the expression I would use. Ripping us off.
Jeremy Leaf is also here, a former residential chairman of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and estate agent.
That's me.
What is the impact of this having on the actual housing market at the moment, Jeremy?
Well, it's very interesting what Alison and Andrew are saying there about the base rate going up, but the reality is, on the street, mortgage rates have been coming down or stabilising, and that's helped to keep activity going. I mean, it felt terrible after September. It felt like someone had pulled the plugs out the phones. It was just that bad. After the Truss budget, it was just awful. And it's gradually picked up from there. And it's actually more balance in the market now. We want to see more transactions, people moving. It's good for the job and social mobility. Housing is such an important part of the economy. It affects so many other trades and businesses.
What did you make of Rishi Sunak's decision to not try to hit the building target?
That is a really important one, because to get that balance in the market, to get people coming in and out, not spending too much on rent and wanting to buy, we need to have more supply, particularly of affordable supply. People want to buy or to rent affordable homes, and there are not enough of them. And it's become an advisory rather than a mandatory target. And I think it's now about a quarter of local authorities don't have a target in which to aim at, which is difficult.
A story in some of the papers today, Jeremy, about how many people in their late 20s are still living at home with mum and dad.
Very interesting.
They can't afford to rent and they can't afford to buy.
Exactly, and they're saving up deposits, you know, because it costs so much more to deposit. And that's why we've seen perhaps business opportunity of some building societies and lenders coming in with 95 or 100% mortgages.
So that was the Skipton Building Society earlier this week, I think, didn't they announce that they are going to launch a product which is a zero deposit mortgage. Why would they do that now? And why haven't they done that before?
Well, it's another good point, because in a way, why would you issue a mortgage like that if you didn't have confidence in the longer-term ability of the property and the housing market and house prices to maintain their level? Because if there was going to be a lot of negative equity when the house value goes in excess of the mortgage goes in excess of what the house is worth, then they wouldn't be issuing those. But they recognise there's a lot of people out there who would rather pay their mortgage than their landlord's mortgage.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as we saw, didn't we, before when we had these 100% mortgages, sometimes they were 120% mortgage. You could borrow it much more. It caused a lot of problems.
I think what I'm worried about these kind of demand-side measures is this is just going to pump up demand for housing when, without addressing the problem, which is, frankly, we don't build enough houses. And I was interested in what Jeremy said about abolishing the targets, because my understanding was that having these targets at least force local authorities to build some houses. We know that there's frequently immense local objection. People don't want new housing near them. And it's very, very difficult to get anything built in this country because of the planning system. So I think anything that kind of messes around with making it easier to buy houses is all very well for the people who benefit, but it's really not addressing the causes of the housing crisis, which in turn is responsible partly for our terrible, sluggish growth in the economy and all the problems that comes with that.
Alice, you have a very close eye on the economy and on fiscal and policy and financial decisions. Can you understand what this government are doing at the moment with the economy? We've discussed on this show a few times, are they making life quite difficult now so that in the run-up to the next election, they can decrease taxes? They might, obviously it's a Bank of England's decision, but by that point maybe the inflation will be down, they can reduce the interest rate. Are we being held to ransom effectively with electioneering in mind?
I think that's quite an astute analysis, but I think you do have to reflect on the kind of situation that Rishi Sunak inherited, the absolute car crash of the Truss budget. He did have to kind of just put the fire out, basically. But I do think you're right. I think that they're sort of gambling on pain now with perhaps some sweeties.
Do you think the public will see through that?
I think the real issue when people come to vote at the next election will be, are they poorer now than they were 13 years ago when this government came in? And I think it's very difficult for anybody to answer no.
Yeah, the cost of living crisis is still huge, isn't it, Jeremy?
And it's a big factor because, of course, confidence plays hugely in our market. If you haven't got the confidence to take on debt, you're not going to buy that home, sadly. And if you feel that longer term you are going to be better off, as Alice said, then you're going to take the plunge.
Can I ask you what kind of customers you've got through your door at the moment who want to buy houses? Are they the super rich who aren't affected by any of this? Because let's face it, we've had the biggest transfer of wealth in the last 3 or 4 years in history. Or are they youngsters who have managed to scrimp and save, first-time buyers? What are you seeing?
It's actually a bit of both. The biggest strength is probably in the downsizing, and the first-time buyers are starting to come back because, as we just touched on before, they're paying more in rent, and they look at the figures for mortgage and they think, well, I'd rather pay mine rather than someone else's.
When you say the downsizers, do you mean the sort of retirement generation and they want to release some equity from their house and they're probably then giving it to their kids to get on the property ladder?
One of the biggest issues is people who are renting who want to buy. And because they can't afford to buy, they're not releasing their properties for rental. So the rents are still going up and those people can't buy either. But now that rents have gone up, it's sort of a slow change in the dynamic of the market. Those people have started to come out again and saying, well, look, the rents now have gone to record levels. I've got to move. Why would I pay so much?
It's so
and I'd
true.
get out.
And I think also, I don't know about whether you experience, but I think there are some landlords who are sort of capitalising on this, and some of them genuinely have extra cost to cover, but they're also capitalising on this idea that everyone thinks everything's going up. And they go, oh, I'm so sorry, my gas bill's go, I'm going to have to put an extra 200 quid on your rent, I'm afraid, this month.
You'd probably be surprised. We look after hundreds of landlords, and most of them aren't like that. There are, the word rogue and landlord seems to always play together in the press, doesn't it? It's not always true.
Most landlords own one property.
Correct. I think it's about 89% own 2 or fewer, 3 or fewer, something like that. But most of them are sitting down with tenants and they're working it through. There are some difficult ones. There's some difficult tenants as well out there.
And
it's a question, absolutely. So it's a question of sitting down with them and trying to find some common ground, which mostly we do.
Oh, rather you than me. That sounds really stressful.
Don't you think also, Alice, the Tories have got to find a way so that people who are in their early 30s can afford to buy a home?
Yeah, I mean, this is an absolutely existential problem for the Conservative. The average age of the Conservative voter now is basically deceased.
One way of putting it.
The party's not going to survive if it can't do something for young people.
Yeah.
And frankly, if you can't buy a house, you can't get on the ladder, you can't start a family, all of the things that essentially turn people into Conservative voters are unavailable to many young people. And the Tories have really failed to do anything about this, and it doesn't. And I've yet to hear any ideas from them.
Well, they've got to start building some houses, as Jeremy said.
Absolutely.
That's going to
and
be
soon.
key. And soon.
Yeah, and greenhouses. I don't mean greenhouses you can grow your own vegetables, although obviously they would be quite convenient too, but they need to be building. Every single house that needs to be built needs to have eco-credentials so that people can reduce their bills.
Now, still to come, Adam Price has announced he's quitting as leader of the Welsh Nationalist Party Plaid Cymru. We'll tell you why in just a moment. This is To The Point on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Beat the establishment.
It's 10:21. You're with To The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Right, the Welsh Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru, have announced Leah Griffith as their acting leader after Adam Price quit last night because of a bullying scandal. Let's speak to Olivia Utley, who is here with her thoughts. Leah Griffith, who's that?
He is a member of the Welsh Senate, but he's not actually standing in the final election to be the full-time leader of Plaid Cymru. He's just standing as an interim leader. It isn't yet clear what the field is going to be for the leader full-time, but it marks a very difficult moment for Plaid Cymru, really. We're coming up to Plaid Cymru's 100th anniversary of existence. We've had 11 leaders so far, and at the moment, there are questions being asked in Wales about who Plaid Cymru is really appealing to beyond the sort of Welsh heartlands. They're number 3 now in the Senate, behind the Welsh Conservatives. And obviously this report was really quite damning. It spoke of a toxic culture of working, sexual misconduct within the party. And although the leader, Adam Price, wasn't implicated himself, he was obviously presiding over this culture of really very bad behaviour. And when the report
why didn't he do anything about it?
Well, exactly, and I think we're going to find out more as we hear more about exactly what was in the report and why Adam Price didn't do anything earlier. And on the 3rd of May, when the report was released, apparently Adam Price says he wanted to stand down and was told by the party that he should remain in place. He's got his supporters. People call him a once-in-a-generation politician. But he didn't stand down at the time, and now a week later is having to stand down because of massive amounts of pressure on him. So really this has worked out as badly as it possibly could for Plaid Cymru.
Can I just ask how the report came about in the first place? Who made the complaints?
There were a number of complaints on it's so many aspects of the culture of Plaid Cymru. There were complaints on toxic working culture, there were complaints on bullying from really very senior people in the party, and then there were these complaints of sexual misconduct. So the report's been in the offing for a long time now, and it was becoming more and more evident that Adam Price had been presiding over this really very bad culture in the party. So there are questions being asked about why he didn't resign, not only when the report came out, but beforehand when the investigation was being made.
I remember him because he was at Westminster for some years as a Parliamentary MP. He's a very good speaker, he's very charismatic, but this is a disaster, isn't it?
It really is a disaster for him. Yeah, as you say, he has huge fans within the party who believe that he was sort of once-in-a-lifetime politician who were going to turn around the fate of Plaid Cymru. He is a very good speaker, but it isn't really clear what he's done to Plaid Cymru's chances in the time that he's been leader. They are still number 3 in the Senate. That is not good, behind the Welsh Conservatives, who are not very popular in Wales.
You don't sense there's a great clamour in Wales for independence, do you?
No, exactly. And Plaid Cymru have always sort of kept their... well, in recent years anyway, have kept their sort of independence credentials pretty quiet because they know that polling for independence in Wales is extremely low. I mean, low single figures.
Much lower than in Scotland.
Exactly.
Well, talking of politicians that have a whiff of perhaps sexual misconduct about them, not that he has personally, but I'm saying the report concluded that some people did. Should we talk about Donald Trump? So he obviously came out, he got this terrible, this verdict, not terrible for the woman who brought this claim against him. She was on TV yesterday saying it was the best day of her life. She got awarded $5 million in this civil case against Trump for sexual misconduct. He has now hit back at her, hasn't he?
He has.
But he's also bragging it's doing him very well in the polls with his base.
Well, exactly. And there are plenty of commentators in America who don't think that CNN should have given him this platform on, days after he was forced to pay a £5 million fine to the victim of sexual assault. It was sexual assault, finally, that he got charged for rather than rape in the civil court, this was. But CNN allowed him to come on for an hour yesterday. For the first 5 or 6 minutes, he was literally just uninterrupted talking about electoral fraud, talking about January 6th. Just ranting. And CNN, a high-up executive at CNN said that they just didn't have time. Someone asked why they weren't fact-checking in real time. And CNN said that they just didn't have the time or the resources to fact-check all the lies in real time.
Even by his standards, it was an extraordinary performance.
It was absolutely extraordinary. And he said that it was all... He repeated the claim, which he was found to have defamed his victim, that it was all a con job, was the words that he used, and that he had never even met her. And then he said that his poll ratings, as you mentioned there, had gone up as a result of this sexual abuse claim. Well, it's very hard to see where he's getting those figures from. Although the audience last night, which was a Republican audience and apparently some swing voters, seemed to be very, very much behind him. They could have been taken basically from a Trump rally when you hear how supportive they were of his comments.
He also said that he would pardon potentially pardon some of the Capitol Hill rioters if he became president. It's like he can't help himself, can he? It's just like he goes out there. I mean, I understand why he'd come out swinging. If you genuinely felt, if we take his word for it, that he doesn't remember even meeting this woman, and then 23 years later, after an allegation of misconduct or sexual assault, he has to give her $5 million, I'd be ready to rant on national TV. I mean, it's no wonder, really, that he wants to come out and express that anger.
Yeah, although when you hear the details of the case, it does a bit stretch belief that he doesn't remember meeting this woman at all. And it is pretty fitting with Donald Trump's overall approach to these matters. It was a really extraordinary spectacle to have an hour of Donald Trump there. He called it was a very ill-tempered exchange. He called the CNN producer a presenter, a nasty woman. And CNN executives afterwards said that they were ashamed to have produced the show, whether the presenter wasn't hitting back enough or whether it felt as though that CNN had simply just lost control of what was going on.
It's hard to get a word in edgeways and Trump is very experienced. We shouldn't forget that.
Absolutely.
He's been around a very, very long time, been broadcasting for decades, and he just walked all over the woman presenter.
Absolutely.
A very uncomfortable hour for her.
A very uncomfortable hour, and you do have to wonder why CNN didn't see it coming. As you say, what Donald Trump is very good at is talking, and he had a term as president. He does know what he's doing in terms of getting his message across.
So, and of course he loads CNN.
Exactly.
He was at war with CNN the whole time he was president.
And having that extremely sympathetic audience, of course, made it much, much easier for Donald Trump and made the presenter's job sort of almost impossible. You had, man after man, and it was pretty much all men in the audience, standing up and throwing these very softball questions at Donald Trump, giving him what was definitely a very easy ride.
Did CNN not vet that audience either?
Well, they deliberately wanted an audience of Republicans and swing voters. I didn't hear from many swing voters at all. I don't know if that was a condition of Donald Trump appearing on the show and they wanted the interview so much that they agreed to it. But one way or another, it was a very bizarre spectacle.
I haven't watched the whole interview. I want to go and watch it now, don't you?
It is amazing.
And you wonder, as the presenter, it just sounds horrendous as to be the host of a show like that.
Well, he bulldozed her.
But she surely would have been prepared to hold him to account. I mean, even the other thing that I'm just envisaging now in the run-up between him possibly getting the nominations for the Republican Party is how many more legal cases he's going to get himself into. Because if he goes on TV like that on a regular basis and he's just shooting from the hip and all of his inhibitions appear to have gone, he seems even more emboldened than he did a few years ago. He's going to end up in court. He's going to be bankrupt with all the fines he's going to have to pay.
Well, absolutely. And if you're charged with defaming someone and then you go on TV and
then you
do the same thing again...
The damages, she got more damages for the defamation than for the sexual
assault. Exactly. And then he comes on television and says precisely the same thing. So, as you say, it's hard to see how his route to the presidency isn't simply going to get tangled up in legal case after legal case. But perhaps he has a point that the more he does get into these legal cases, the more his most traditional sort of staunch base likes him, and we have seen that the support for DeSantis is
waning a little.
Is waning a little
Can
bit.
never write off Donald Trump ever. You never know what he's going to do next.
Right,
it was an extraordinary performance.
Thanks, Olivia. OK, still to come this morning, the Archbishop of Canterbury has attacked the government's migration plans. Was he right to do so? What do you think, David?
Not in such a poorly way. He said the plans were immoral. No, it's immoral, Archbishop, to allow these small boats to cross the channel and sink.
This is the point, and here is the news with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Bev. It's 10:31. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's widely expected to raise interest rates for a 12th consecutive time later as it tries to tackle soaring inflation. Economists predict the base rate will increase by 0.25 percentage point from 4.25% to 4.5%. The rise would take interest rates to the highest level since 2008. Rail services run by operator TransPennine Express are to be brought under government control. The Transport Secretary's announced the decision follows continuous cancellations. Mark Harper says the firm's contract won't be extended nor renewed. The Department of Transport will instead take over from May the 28th. Well, let's cross live now to the House of Commons, where an urgent question is being granted to Conservative MP Sir Bill Cash on the government's decision to scrap only 600 EU laws rather than 4,000 as originally pledged. Let's hear.
Who do you think you're speaking to, Secretary of State? I don't want. I think we need to understand each other. I am the defender of this House and these benches on both sides. I am not going to be spoken to by a Secretary of State who is absolutely not accepting my ruling. Take it with good grace and accept it that members should hear it first, not a WMS or what you decide. These members have been elected by their constituents and they have the right to hear it first. And it is time this government recognised we're all elected, we're all members of Parliament and use the correct manners. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise. What I was trying to say was that I'm very sorry that I did not meet the standards which you expect of Secretaries of State, forgive my language. But what I have been trying to do is make sure that I provide as much clarity as possible. So I am actually very pleased to be coming to the House to speak. I'm very pleased to be coming to the House to speak on this issue. I have written a written ministerial statement to explain that yesterday we tabled an amendment to the retained EU law bill that amends the operation of the sunset in Clause 1 of the bill. This is a technical change. It introduces a schedule to the bill of retained EU law that will be revoked on 31st of December 2023. The schedule includes around 600 pieces of legislation provided by nearly all departments and spans a huge number of policy areas. This is in response to concerns raised in this House and will provide the legal clarity and certainty that has been called for. I would like to reassure my honourable friend that the 600 pieces in the schedule are not the limit of our ambition, neither the beginning nor the end, but actually over the past year, as Whitehall departments have been working hard to identify retained EU law to preserve, reform or revoke, it has become clear that time constraints have led to the programme becoming more about preserving EU laws than prioritising meaningful reform. That is why we are proposing a new approach. And Mr. Speaker, had I known the intense excitement that the House would have had about this issue, I would have come running, running to make sure that these technical details could be investigated by all and sundry. But we are proposing a new approach, Mr. Speaker, one that will ensure ministers and officials are enabled to focus more on reforming rule and doing that faster. I'm pleased to say that the government has already reformed or revoked over 1,000 pieces of rule. In addition to the list of around 600 revocations in the schedule to the retained EU law bill, the Financial Services and Markets Bill and the Procurement Bill will repeal around 500 further pieces of rule, meaning we will have repealed not 600, but actually more than 2,000 pieces of rule by the end of the year. We are committed to lightening the regulatory burden on businesses and helping to spur economic growth, and our Edinburgh reforms of UK financial services include over 30 regulatory reforms to unlock investment and boost growth in towns and cities across the UK. Our regulatory reform announcement yesterday set out a long-term plan to reform UK regulation over the coming months. As a down payment on that commitment, we announced changes that will reduce disproportionate EU-derived reporting requirements that could save businesses around £1 billion a year. That will just be the first in a series of announcements the government will be making on reforming regulation to drive growth. And in addition to the schedule, the powers in the bill will still enable us to revoke, replace and reform any outdated EU laws that remain on our statute book by 2026. Mr. Speaker, this new approach will provide the space for longer-term and more ambitious reforms. It will also, members of this House, I no doubt will be pleased to hear, mean fewer statutory instruments will be required to preserve EU laws that are deemed appropriate to maintain. I again would like to reassure my honourable friend that we will still fully take back control of our laws and end supremacy and the special status of retained EU law by the end of 2023. This will ensure we are ending the shadow statute book and inappropriate entrenchment of EU law concepts in domestic statute.
Sir William.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the standing orders of this House, the European Scrutiny Committee is specifically charged with examining the legal and political consequences of EU legislation. It reported on the 21st of July 2022, after a 5-month inquiry in support of the bill, and which was passed unamended by a large majority in this elected House and by the Public Bill Committee, all of which endorsed the government's policy on the bill. The Secretary of State has been asked formally and personally 3 times to appear in front of the European Scrutiny Committee since February. Why has she failed to do so? The amendments published today, apart from her very short written ministerial statement yesterday and her article in the press today, are not accompanied by any explanation to this House, despite the utter reversal in vital respects of the bill as passed by this elected House. Why not? The amendments have not been subjected to any analysis or questioning by this House, which is now essential, given the fundamental change in government policy. This House is being treated in a manner which is clearly inconsistent with clear promises already made. Will my right honourable friends specifically seek and make arrangements for the immediate deferral of the report stage in the unelected House of Lords, which is due to take place on the 15th and 17th of this month, so that she can come to the European Scrutiny Committee next week and answer our questions as provided for by standing orders, and provide a command paper before that report stage to explain the reasons for these fundamental questions of constitutional importance which are being made and which affect all our constituents, all our voters, and the coherence of our statute book and our legal system.
Senator State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman asked many questions. I will endeavour to answer them, although I think he knows that he has heard the answers before. But I'm very happy to respond on the floor of the House. We've had many conversations in private where we have discussed retained EU law. He has written to me about attending the European Scrutiny Committee, and I replied that until the policy was settled, I could not attend the committee, but instead I could have engagement with colleagues, and that is what I have done. Of course, I'm very delighted to attend the European scrutiny. I attend multiple select committees in my role, not just the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, but Minister for Equalities, and I'm very happy to speak to the committee. But there is no point, and Mr. Speaker, you will no doubt sympathise with this, having to talk about policy on the floor of the House before we know exactly what is settled. He claims that it is a change of policy. It is a change of approach. The policy is still the same. We are ending EU supremacy. We are ending interpretive effects. But what we are changing is how we're doing that. We could have ended up with an SI programme, 450 SIs to preserve EU law. What I have done is make sure that business in particular, but also those parliamentarians who have raised concerns with me, including many of those chuntering on the opposite benches, about how we can see clarity and have some transparency. And I have shown exactly what we are doing. I have listed all of the laws which we are removing, and I think that there is a key point to make here. The reason why we left the European Union was not just to delete EU law from the statute book, but to make our economy better. In order to do that, we have to reform the laws. If we delete the laws from the statute book, we will be starting from scratch in terms of bringing in the reforming primary legislation. This is a better approach. It was my suggestion to the Prime Minister. I'm very pleased that he accepted it. And I'm very proud to be standing here at the dispatch box, showing that those of us who are Brexiteers can be pragmatic and do what is right for the British people. And that is why I'm very pleased to be explaining this change on the floor of the House today, Mr. Speaker.
Shadow Minister Justin Mabbott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What an absolute shambles. I think this is the sixth different government representative at the dispatch box for this bill, and unfortunately for the Secretary of State, she's the one who's going to have to hear the words from us that no government minister wants to hear, that we told you so. But we did, repeatedly, as did the Institute of Directors, the TUC, the Bar Council, and a host of other organisations. So it has to be asked, why didn't the government listen to those experts in the first place? It was completely unrealistic, reckless and frankly arrogant to think you could strike 4,000 laws from the statute book in the timescales set out in the bill. It's no use blaming the Blob or the Anti-Growth Coalition or the BBC. This humiliating U-turn is completely down to government hubris that has found itself crashing up against reality. So will she apologise to the entire House, to all the trade unions, business, legal and environmental groups who they told were wrong? Will she also apologise for announcing its policy change, not to the House, but to her friends, or should I say now her former friends, in the ERG, and then to the press? Can she tell us at what point did they decide on this change of course, and on what basis have they chosen the 600 regulations to be removed? Or is it 2,000 now, because she mentioned that in her statement as well? But whilst we welcome this humiliating climb down that sees the cliff edge go, this bill still gives enormous powers to ministers, and at last the cat is out of the bag about what they want to do with them. We're concerned that whilst the mode of delivery has changed, the destination has remained the same, and that's revealed in the Smarter Regulations to Grow the Economy paper released yesterday, which contains a clear plan to water down 2P and working time rights. We have warned time and again of the threat to workers' rights in this bill, and in response to that, the Minister said, and I quote, "The government have no intention of abandoning our strong record on workers' rights, having raised domestic standards over recent years to make some of them of the highest in the world." Well, we can strike that from the record as we can strike the Secretary of State's leadership hopes. How can a government elected on a manifesto that promised to build on existing employment law justify an approach that will water down workers' protection? It just goes to show that you cannot trust the Tories with workers' rights.
Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I found most illuminating about this process is how little the front bench opposite understands what it is we're doing. And so they simply stand up and repeat their usual talking lines. We have made repeated commitments that we are not watering down workers' rights in this House. If he actually read and understood what we'd written, he would understand that what we're doing is maintaining workers' rights but reducing the bureaucracy that will save £1 billion and something that both workers and employers want. I know it's really tough and I know there are lots of words in it, but the truth is, I say to the opposition benches, I can explain it, but I cannot understand it for them. This is a very, very simple change in approach. We are having the exact same effects that we're always going to have. We are removing over 2,000 pieces of EU legislation, and we're removing over 2,000 pieces of EU legislation, and it is delightful to see the Labour front bench and the ERG, as they claim, to be on the same side for once. It makes me realise that if I am upsetting people on both sides, I am probably taking the pragmatic middle ground, and I'm very pleased to be doing so. There is, Mr. Speaker, so much opportunity and reform that we can take on EU law reform, and that is what this programme is about.
The House. Well, that was Kemi Badenoch, the Business Secretary. This, of course, is the story, the bonfire of EU regulations, which Rishi Sunak pledged 4,000 regulations would go by the end of the year. Badenoch confirming to the Commons we'll be lucky if 600 go.
That's
Another
right.
sellout on Brexit.
And Bill Cash asked for that urgent question because obviously this is riling people on both sides. And of course, Kemi Badenoch saying that she is just being a pragmatist. This is just practical, and she can't keep everyone happy.
Yeah. So. But what's a complete nonsense about it? I don't even know what she's talking about. Carol Malone and Stephen Pounder with us. Carol normally comes in talking to me anyway, but Carol, let's go straight into...
Because that bloke was talking all the time, we couldn't get a word in.
The big story, the Archbishop of...
Yes, this is... He stood up in the Lords yesterday, I beg your pardon, and he's trying to overturn the migration bill. Now, what I don't understand why he's there in the first place, and no other denomination is represented, Irish, Scotch, Welsh, in the Lords, so I don't quite know why he's there.
26 bishops.
Yeah, but none of them from the Irish, Welsh or the Scottish. But he's interfering in politics yet again. This was the bloke who actually tried to interfere in Brexit as well. Yeah. And instead of doing that, he really ought to concentrate on his own job, which is the Anglican Church, which is hemorrhaging people. And it's in a mess now. But he's not doing that. And he's doing this instead. And he said yesterday it was this new migration bill was morally unacceptable. And he called it politically impractical. One, I don't know quite know how he knows that. But two, it is not morally unacceptable to try and stop people killing themselves as they're crossing the Channel. It is not morally unacceptable to stop the traffickers. It is not morally unacceptable to stop the Albanian gangsters who are now bringing Albanians over here to make them go and work in the drug and prostitution trade. So I don't quite know what he's talking about. This guy, for years, if he really wants to get into politics, he should hang up his mitre and go and get elected somewhere. But he doesn't. He just does this and he interferes. And he can do, he has no solution to the votes. He has no solution to migration, nor to Labour. But they're saying that everything the Tories come up with isn't going to work. And it's, he's so out of touch with the British people who really want this bill to work. They really want these votes stopped. The British people are not against migration. Every poll that comes out, there was a British attitude survey recently that said they're not against my immigration, but they are against the chaos and the illegality of what is happening in the Channel. And people like people like the Archbishop here, sits in his ivory tower and pontificates and never has to take responsibility for what he's doing.
I think that's absolutely right.
Well, I have to say, I'm going to pick up on the crumbs that Carol's left here. But
Sorry.
If you were in Tehran today and you popped into the Majlis, you know, the Iranian parliament, you would see the Ayatollahs sitting there, because the House of Lords and the Majlis in Tehran are the only two legislatures in the world where people, on the basis of their religious position, can sit in the chamber and run the country. I think he's perfectly entitled to talk about morality, but he should talk about it from the pulpit, not from the Parliament, from Westminster. And I think this is very, very confusing. It's not helpful, and I just wish, you know, there'd be a little more positivity, because I think Carol's actually makes an important point. Nobody wants to see a continuation of the present system.
No.
We can disagree. I think the four of us would probably disagree about how we should respond to it. But the fact remains to simply say, "Oh no, it's immoral," and then just turn the other, just wander away. Talk about living in the high castle. I mean, it's sort of, you know, living in the high tower. Lambeth Palace is where he lives.
Yes, he does.
You don't get much higher than
and
that.
it's a very smart place.
The one thing that we sort of aren't talking about enough on this issue is why the French are not doing more. I'd support Welby to stand up and say, hang on, we've given the French, what was it, another 300 million quid or something we gave them recently, 400 million quid. What are you doing with that money to stop them pushing off their dinghies from the shoreline?
Imagine you're the mayor of Calais, and you've got 2,000 people within your circumscription who are just causing no end of mayhem. What do you want to do? Push them out as quick as you possibly can. You can hardly blame them.
Do you know what? Then it's wasted money. Then why are we giving them the money?
But don't you think this is a fight the government is relishing with unelected lords and people like Welby who are completely out of touch?
Yeah, but I fear
the public's on the government side on this.
Yeah, but I fear they won't win. But I read something yesterday, which you probably know more about this than me. Even if the Lords do overturn it, the government can still defy them. They've done it 7 times in history, and they could do it again if they need to. That won't go down well with the left, who will say, no, this is not democracy.
Sorry, it's only on a finance bill. They can only do that, and they can also only do it if it's in the manifesto.
If it's not in the manifesto. If they flatten this, they can put it in the next King's speech. Then they can use the Parliament Act to get it through.
But
it's called the Salisbury Convention.
It's all very well, Labour and the Archbishop of Canterbury, absolutely peeing on everything the government tries to do. But there has to be a solution to this. Does he not know how many people have died in the Channel? Does he not realise what is happening to vulnerable people who are handing over 5-6 grand at a time to come over here? And does he not realise the chaos it's causing to every single community in this country? And I think the truth of it is he doesn't, because he doesn't mix among ordinary people. He mixes with the high and mighty. He never comes out of his palace.
Imagine living in Kent. This problem. Thousands of migrants in hotels.
Do you think, though, I mean, we're about to get figures which looks like it's probably going to be net migration of about 750,000 people in the last year in this country, highest ever. Are we talking about these numbers, which are awful and they do affect communities, and it is tragic? It's just nobody's winning in this situation. Are we spending too much time talking about that? We should be talking about the overall migration figures when we don't have the services running at capacity.
Well, the overall migration figures obviously include family reunion, they include students, and they include people who are coming here, like doctors, from Sudan.
And they're legal.
That's
they're
right.
legal.
Exactly. So it's illegal. But what is insane about this is the fact that the Home Office is still utterly sclerotic. It is simply it takes 18 months minimum to actually
get one.
Now look, what you should do. I mean, I've said this to you before, Andrew, and I've said this to you before. We should actually detain the people on arrival and make an assessment within 36 hours, like the Dutch do. If the Dutch can do it within 36 hours at Schiphol Airport,
and then kick them out.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we don't kick them out.
No, but not just kick them out, but also let in those people who have a genuine welfare.
Yes, sure.
Exactly. So what we should do is separate the sheep from the goats there and then.
And if they've destroyed their papers, out.
Yes, and they do. We know they toss them in the sea before they get.
And they should be fingerprinted there and then. And we then come to my next point, which you all disagree with. I think we should have ID cards immediately so that the black economy can't boom at the moment. Because, I mean, Carol talks about drugs and prostitution. Round my way, it's mostly car washes. And some of them...
Well, that's how they launder money, through car washes, a lot of these gangs. But what I thought was a disturbing development was the Albanian gangs have gone over to France and they've now infiltrated the traffickers, and they're facilitating the bringing over of young Albanians Albanian guys to commit crimes for them. Now, that is a shocking development, and no one's actually talking about that. You know, you see these Albanian gangs in London, they've taken over crime. You know, there's actually a website called Albanians, you've probably seen it, and they're showing off the stuff that they've done, the cars that they've stolen, the drugs that they're selling, the 10 Rolex watches they have.
And how do they get
what's
in?
anyone
Because
doing about it?
what are they fleeing in Albania? There's no
Nothing.
war, no conflict.
Completely.
But they're claiming they've been slaves.
If you go to Tirana or Durrës today, I mean, there's actually a lot going on in Albania at the moment, and you know there is actually a booming economy, particularly up towards the Venetian border in Italy. But I was reading on GB News, is it last week, in the Galapagos Islands, Albanian gangs are facilitating cocaine smuggling.
I mean, it's just
what's going on here?
They're taking over the world. It's
it's awful. Right, royals. As if we had a lot of royals last week. You might have noticed.
Yeah, we did notice.
But let's just talk about it for a moment, because this is a story. It's on our main story on the GB News website as well, if you want to have a look at it. Prince William has given a top honour to a former member of staff who made a bullying complaint about Meghan Markle. Coincidence, Carol Malone?
Well, no, but I think it's good. I think Jason Naff deserves it. He stuck his head above the parapet.
He was the PR man, wasn't he?
He was. Oh, sorry, yes, I should have explained. He was William and Kate's PR man originally, and then he went to work for Meghan and Harry. And while he was there, he witnessed younger members of staff, particularly women, being bullied by Meghan. And he brought it to William's attention. He sent him an email. And he really stuck his head above the parapet. And you know, I think it's good that he's rewarded that, because we still don't know the results of that bullying report.
Because there is a report and it's confidential. We've never seen it.
But why hasn't that been made public?
I think all the more reason for Jason Knauf not having the award now. I think the fact is we're in a very, very toxic relationship here, as we know, between Prince William and Prince Harry. And by doing this, Prince William is taking sides.
Good.
Now,
Seriously, Steve, I think that's good.
I happen to think that we should actually wait till we see the report to find out, because you're in such a febrile part of it.
He will have seen it.
He'll have been a witness
will have seen it.
Yeah, but we haven't seen it. If you two haven't seen it, it doesn't exist.
I don't think we are going to see it.
Yeah, but I think on every level, Prince William is right to try and take sides. You've seen what Harry has done to him the past 2 years, the family secrets. I mean, telling the world his circumstance. We didn't really need to know that. But you know, I don't blame him for having a go back. I don't, and also rewarding the people who've been loyal to him, because that's what this is.
Yeah.
It's quite a passive-aggressive move, though, isn't it, in a way?
Oh, very so. That's it.
For William to do this. I do know where you're coming from. It actually tells you a lot about what William's, perhaps his vision for that relationship is. There isn't one.
No. This is the Lieutenant of the Royal Victorian Order Award, which is a glorious award. It doesn't actually give you many acres and castles and things.
To give you a medal?
But it almost certainly. I think you get a sort of 25% discount on the tours.
Prince William.
He's a young guy as well. He's in his 30s.
The point being about this is,
Jason, he's a good guy. Yeah. He's efficient and was well liked, and he. As you say, Kerry, stuck his head above the parapet.
Would there be any other reason to give him that, though? Like, has he given that much service to the couple?
If you've done work for the royal family, you often get one of those.
It comes up with the rations, by and large.
They're quite minor.
Well, no, the footmen and women normally just get the British Empire Medal. This is one of the highest ones you can. But I think you're absolutely right. This is real clever passive aggression here.
Good.
Because like it or not, he's put down a marker there, and he said this relationship stops here and now. You know, I'm not going to say any more of this personal, private stuff being, about me threatening to hit him.
And wasn't it a joy that Harry was a complete irrelevance at the
Oh,
coronation?
this is perfect. I loved it. You know, I wondered what he felt when Will's been down to kiss the king and was like front and centre. And I loved the fact that Princess Anne's hat obscured his face
and
for
that
the
was
entire
deliberate
ceremony.
When they planned the seating arrangement.
I really hope so. Because all those pictures that Netflix would have hoped would have gone round the world, those iconic pictures of him in the Abbey, they're all going to have a big feather, and all you could see was his ear holes. So I just thought that was just...
There was a flash of ginger, I don't know.
Well, a bit of ginger, yeah.
Are we allowed to say that, Stephen? Probably not. I mean, isn't that a form of bullying? So many people
we've got to move on, guys. First instalment, these two will be back.
Don't tell Diane Abbott.
Now, still to come, the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee is set to announce its latest interest rate decision. More to come on that in the next hour. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with your GB News forecast, brought to you by the Met Office. Sunny spells for many of us today, but interspersed by heavy showers, and once again the threat of thunderstorms and some hail as well. Low pressure, a relatively slack area of low pressure, is sitting over the UK. It's slow moving. There are light winds circulating around this, so only showers that do bubble up through the day will be slow moving, and that's why there's a thunderstorm warning in force for eastern parts of the UK, because here, these slow-moving showers could cause some impacts. Of course, given the slow-moving nature of the showers, some places will avoid the showers altogether and stay dry and bright, so especially Western Scotland. That's where the finest weather will be. And temperatures fairly widely across the UK, close to average for the time of year, mid to high teens generally. The showers continue going into the evening for a few hours, but then after dark they do disappear quite quickly. Then it turns drier, but also generally cloudier, with some low cloud drifting in from the east and becoming fairly extensive. Western areas will avoid the cloud with some breaks and temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures, but where we've got the low cloud, it's a grey and chilly start to Friday. Some drizzle coming along for East Anglia and the southeast for a time, along with a wind from the North Sea. That's going to make it feel quite raw through the day, I think, quite disappointingly on the cool side. The low cloud covering the hills in the east as well, and it's going to stick around through much of the afternoon. But in the west, brighter skies develop, and it's largely dry, with temperatures reaching the high teens in some of the favoured spots. Now, we keep that east-west split going into Friday night, and that's really how we start the weekend. A lot of low cloud in the east, clearer spells towards the north and the west, and plenty of sunshine developing throughout Saturday. Saturday's a mainly dry day, but with that low cloud in the east, there will be some patchy drizzle, a band of rain into the north on Sunday.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 11:01 on Wednesday, the 11th of May. This is The Point on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Another kick in the wallet for homeowners. Interest rates are going to almost certainly rise this lunchtime. What does it mean for you? And mortgages are going to go up even more, I'm afraid.
Kemi Badenoch is hauled to the Commons to face questions about the government's U-turn on ditching EU laws after a former cabinet minister accuses the Prime Minister of breaking his word.
But Europe couldn't seem stronger in Liverpool because, of course, Eurovision fans are there en masse. It's the Eurovision contest this weekend. We're going to catch up with a former winner to discuss the impact of the showpiece event. All that to come. On to the point.
And I've just been reading that Zelensky was saying that the Eurovision Song Contest shouldn't be held here. We've done quite a lot for you. Anyway, we're discussing that as well. Let us know your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. But first of all, here are your news headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 11. Your top stories in the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's widely expected to raise interest rates for a 12th consecutive time in the next hour as it tries to tackle soaring inflation. Economists predict the base rate will increase by 1/4 percentage point from 4.25 to 4.5%. The rise would take interest rates to the highest level since 2008. The head of financial analysis at AJ Bell, Danny Hewson, says it's an incredibly worrying time for mortgage holders, especially those on the standard variable rate.
They have seen thousands of pounds of additional costs piled upon them. The big question, of course, though, is where does it go next? And certainly at the moment, markets are anticipating at least one more interest rate hike of about 1/4%, but potentially interest rates going all the way to 5% towards the summer.
And ahead of another predicted rise in interest rates, Labour's accused Rishi Sunak of being personally responsible for what it's branded a Tory mortgage penalty. Households have paid over £1 billion in higher mortgage payments since Liz Truss's mini-budget last year. That's according to Labour's analysis of research by the Resolution Foundation think tank. But the party claims the blame also lies with the Prime Minister, who they say left Britain with a high tax burden when he was Chancellor. According to consumer group Which, almost 750,000 households missed their rent or mortgage payment last month. Rail services run by operator TransPennine Express are to be brought under government control. The Transport Secretary's announced the decision follows continuous cancellations. Mark Harper says the firm's contract won't be extended nor renewed. The Department of Transport will instead take over from May the 28th. The train operator, which covers Northern England and runs in parts of Scotland, saw 1 in 6 services cancelled in March. And some news in the last few minutes. The BBC has found there were no concerns about Richard Sharp's integrity while he was chairman of the broadcaster. A BBC conflicts of interest review was commissioned following Mr Sharp's resignation from the company in April after he was found to have breached the rules for public appointments. The committee confirmed it had no concerns in respect of the chairman's integrity whilst in the role. Plaid Cymru have appointed Claire Griffith as interim leader. It follows the resignation of Adam Price last night after a damning report into the Welsh Nationalist Party's culture. The report found the party had failed to implement a zero-tolerance approach to sexual harassment, bullying and misogyny. The appointment will be subject to ratification by the party's National Council on Saturday. Former US President Donald Trump says he'd pardon many supporters for their involvement in the January the 6th Capitol riots if he wins the next election. Speaking at a CNN town hall in New Hampshire, he also refused to acknowledge he lost the 2020 election. The debate was also the first time he'd been seen publicly since a jury found him guilty of sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll in the 1990s. He continues to deny ever meeting the magazine writer.
Just so you understand, ready? I never met this woman. I never saw this woman. I have no idea who this woman is. This is a fake story, made up story. We had a horrible Clinton-appointed judge. He was horrible. He allowed her to put everything in. He allowed us to put nothing in.
Mr. President,
this is a
you're
fake
recounting your version
story.
of events. The Prime Minister has angered Conservative Brexiteers by scrapping the government's pledge to remove thousands of EU laws by the end of the year. Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch says only 600 will now be revoked from the UK statute book instead of the proposed 4,000. Labour's branded the move a humiliating U-turn from a divided government. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who introduced the plans, has accused Rishi Sunak of abandoning his promise.
His words and his deeds are not matching. That is a dangerous position for a Prime Minister to be in. The 2019 manifesto that people like me got elected on is not being followed. Brexit, that was meant to be safeguarded by this, is now being blocked by Remainers in the House of Lords, and weakness coming from ministries. This seems to me to be a real blow to Brexit, a problem for Brexit, not delivering on what we want and not giving us the fruits of deregulation that we voted for.
The number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen to a new record high. According to NHS England, an estimated 7.3 million people were waiting to start treatment in March. That's up from 7.2 million in February. It's the highest number since records began in August 2007. And Canada has unveiled its new passport design with more security features and a nod to our newly crowned king. It's the first passport in the Commonwealth to mention the new monarch. But the coat of arms that it displays is in fact the Queen's, as the new version was created before King Charles approved it. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Bev and Andrew.
Well, the Bank of England is going to raise interest rates, we think, later this morning.
It is, and you've been getting in touch about this. Sort of, Deborah has said, in the late 80s and 90s, we had mortgage payments going up. It seemed like monthly, so we worked as much as possible and we did extra jobs. I still have friends who were made homeless at the time, refused a council house, or considered to have bought it themselves and have been in rented accommodation ever since. They never blamed the government at the time. There was no global pandemic or major war. It's a different mindset, isn't it?
It is, no. But I can remember when when the Bank of England, Norman Lamont raised interest rates with 5 or 6% in one day.
Yes.
I was at the Liberal Democrat conference, and the Liberal Democrats, of course, didn't bother to debate the fact interest rates went up 6%. They would debated animal cruelty instead. It was cruel to us journalists who were there to listen to it. But I, as a
How do you remember that?
I can never
how long
forget
ago was
it.
that?
Oh, that was back in 1990 or 1992. It was a disaster. But people like me, when the interest was, I took in lodgers.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I had to give the keys back.
That's right. Well, David has said a person who lived through mortgage rates above 10%.
Yeah.
I'm always slightly amused at the outcry against current rates. And another David, said the onus is on the financial institutions to ensure that mortgages only borrow as much as they can afford and factor in potential interest rate rises. When I was young, there were clear controls on borrowing.
And too many people thought that low interest rates were here forever. And they just assumed that's it. And, of course, what goes down goes up.
And actually, we've got a borrow mindset now. We have a credit mindset, don't we? That's sort of seeped in over the last 20 years.
Well,
I was brought up.
I think
if you can't afford it, don't buy it.
That was exactly how we were brought up. But also, I think the pandemic it created an atmosphere of please from the government.
Yeah, absolutely.
Furlough, all the financial schemes.
Totally. The government is there to pick me up. Now, ahead of the Bank of England's predicted rate rise, let's speak to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Now, I'm hoping that Liam Halligan is down the line because he's not in the studio. Oh, he is down the line. Hello, Liam. We expected you to walk through the door any minute. It's much nicer to have you in real life. What's going on today with the interest rates? It's so depressing. 12th increase in a row.
It does look as if the Bank of England will raise interest rates, as you say, Bev, for the 12th time in a row. The building behind me, you've got the 9 members of the Monetary Policy Committee that set rates 8 times a year. If we just have a look at the history of interest rates over recent years, I've got a little graphic here. You'll see that in 2019, 2020, before the COVID lockdown, they got up to 0.75%, just below 1%. Then, of course, they were 0.25% throughout lockdown. Ultra emergency low levels. Since then, since the end of 2021, we've gone from 0.25% up in steps all the way to 4.25%, as inflation, of course, has rocketed to its current level of 10.1% in March this year, still in double digits. And it's because inflation was still in double digits in March. That was a bit of a shock. A lot of people expected it to fall down below 10%. The cost of living squeeze still very much with us, that the Bank of England is likely to put interest rates up again in about 50 minutes' time to 4.5%, the highest since 2008. And that kind of seems counterintuitive. Why would they raise interest rates even more when we're all being hammered with high shopping bills and bigger mortgage payments? It's because they want to squeeze demand out of the economy to stop prices rising. It's a very blunt instrument. It's a cruel instrument. It's called monetary policy. We've had an awful lot of interest rate rises, and it looks as if we're going to get another one today, Bev.
Problem is as well, Liam, you've talked about inflation. The worst impact of inflation is on the poorer families because it's particularly difficult. Food inflation is still really, really high.
That's right, Andrew. Inflation has been surprisingly sticky here in the UK. As I said, we're still in double digits. We're going to get another inflation number for April out in the middle of next week, when it's likely to fall below 10%, probably even below 9%. But food price inflation in March, Andrew, was still 19.1% higher, food prices higher than in March 2022, with food price inflation still rising, and that won't come as any surprise to people who do their daily and weekly shops. Food price inflation is still high, but it's high across Western Europe. But across Western Europe, in the Eurozone, for instance, inflation is now down below 7%. It's below 5% in the US because their energy markets work differently to ours. European energy markets are much more subsidised. The Americans have got all that brand new shale oil and gas, keeping their wholesale gas prices low. So we are still in the middle of this cost of living crisis. I think when the Bank of England does raise interest rates, almost certainly at the top of the hour at noon, it'll be all eyes then on the Bank of England governor. There'll be a press conference, which I'll go into, and then I'll be back in the 1 o'clock hour with the Bank of England governor talking about the future path of interest rates. Is this the last interest rate rise? And is there going to be another one soon? It strikes me it really depends on next week's inflation number. If inflation does fall strongly below double digits, below 9%, so it's 8 point something, then this interest rate rise that we're highly likely to get today could be the last one. Look, a lot of savers like the fact that interest rates are going up, and a lot of GB News viewers and listeners will be older people who are savers. But if you're a young family, you've just bought a home and you're trying to weather that huge mortgage, these interest rate rises are scary. And it brings me no pleasure to say that it's almost certain we will get another interest rate rise, Andrew and Bev, at 12 o'clock today.
OK, thank you so much, Liam. Make sure you keep with GB News. There is no safer pair of hands to talk you through events like this than the great Liam Halligan. So make sure you stay with us for the rest of the afternoon.
Absolutely.
Now, while we've been on air, the Business Secretary has been hauled to the Commons to explain the government U-turn on repealing EU laws.
A lot of Tory backbenchers in particular are deeply unhappy because the Prime Minister pledged that he would get rid of 4,000 of these EU regulations by the end of the year. The Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hall, ranted and raved, frankly, at the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Before we begin the urgent question, I note that it is highly regrettable that the government decided not to offer an oral statement on this matter yesterday. Given the importance of this announcement, on such matters, full engagement with Parliament and its committees is essential. Before I call the Chair, I will remind the government we are elected to hear it first, not to read it in the Telegraph, and certainly not a WMS is satisfactory on such an important matter. Hence, that I would always say I'm now going to call the Chair of the European Scrutiny Committee to ask the urgent question. Sir William Cash.
Mr. Speaker, will the Secretary of State make a statement regarding the question of her failure to come to the House before she made the written ministerial statement and the press article today in the Daily Telegraph?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very sorry that the sequencing that we chose was not to your satisfaction. I was...
Order. That is totally not acceptable. No. Who do you think you're speaking to, Secretary of State? I think we need to understand each other. I am the defender of this House and these benches on both sides. I am not going to be spoken to by a Secretary of State who is absolutely not accepting my ruling. Take it with good grace and accept it that members should hear it first, not a WMS or what you decide. These members have been elected by their constituents and they have the right to hear it first. And it is time this government recognised we're all elected, we're all members of Parliament, and use the correct manners. Secretary of State.
Well, that was Lindsay Hoyle really laying the law down.
I know.
And speakers, nothing annoys a speaker more than when a major piece of political legislation or announcement is leaked to a newspaper or a broadcaster and it's not revealed
Is
on the
that
floor
why he
of the
was so
Commons.
cross?
That's what he's
What was
cross
he
about.
getting at there?
He thinks there should have been a statement in the Commons yesterday by Kemi Badenoch because this story had broken in a newspaper yesterday.
Right.
And that's what and this has been a problem for governments of all political persuasions, and speakers get he really got his knickers
Put her back in a box, didn't he?
Certainly
Well, let's
did.
get a reaction from our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Fireworks there, Tom, in the House of Commons. Sir Lindsay Hoyle was not happy about that. Neither was Bill Cash, hence the question. Just remind us why he's asking this question today.
Yes, absolutely. I was up there in the press gallery for that back and forth, and it was a really quite dramatic moment. You could really feel the mood in the chamber shift because Kemi Badenoch had already been on the back foot here. She was coming to answer an urgent question that the Speaker had granted from the chair of the European Scrutiny Committee, Bill Cash, not only about this issue of the U-turn, but the fact that Parliament has been so delayed in being informed of this. A written ministerial statement was laid before the House at around 3:10 yesterday, but no minister came to the dispatch box to explain that decision. MPs were not able to question the Secretary of State, and Bill Cash later in this exchange said that he had invited Kemi Badenoch 3 times to appear before the European Scrutiny Committee to explain her thinking on this legislation, and she had 3 times refused to appear before that committee. So there was some real frustration there. Kemi Badenoch, for her part, was saying until the policy was settled, she couldn't appear before that committee. But the way in which she responded to the Speaker and the way in which she responded to some other of those MPs who stood up in the House of Commons was seen by some to be a little bit condescending and did not set the mood in a very amelioratory way, I suppose, for these exchanges. Indeed, at one point, the Secretary of State said that if she was upsetting both the Labour Party and the European Research Group, she must be doing something right. She must be taking a pragmatic and middle path. Well, many people who followed the career of Kemi Badenoch will have thought that that's not particularly her brand, that the pragmatic middle path is not exactly what people might have expected from the Secretary of State for Business and Trade. She is someone who has been seen to be on the Brexiteering right of the party, and yet today, from that dispatch box, she was revelling in having upset the ERG. That is something that may well damage her potential leadership hopes in any future election.
Tom Harwood, very interesting. ERG, of course, the European Research Group, they are the Spartans of the Brexit movement. And Kemi Badenoch, as Tom says, has been seen as a future Tory leader. Tom, thank you very much. Now, still to come, there's a lot of anger over the role of bishops in this big debate about the government Stop the Boats policy, not least led by the Archbishop of Canterbury. We're going to be speaking to a very senior cleric who's rather irritated by the role
Not as much as you, I bet.
Yeah, of Archbishop Welby. In fact, the late Queen's chaplain, no less.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing with the audience very much at the heart of it. Like like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us 4, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 11:23. You're with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner on GB News. This is To The Point.
So ministers have clashed with the Archbishop of Canterbury after he attacked the government's illegal migration bill as being morally unacceptable.
Honestly, how dare he? Justin Welby said the legislation had too many problems for one speech, and he says it's going to damage the United Kingdom's standing in the world. We're going to speak now to the former chaplain to the late Queen, Elizabeth II, Gavin Ashenden, who joins us now. Gavin, shouldn't he keep his preaching to the pulpit in the church rather than in the House of Lords?
I'm afraid he should. The problem was he wasn't preaching in the House of Lords, so he was giving a political speech, and given the language and the values of the content of the speech, it was a progressive speech from the political left. And the problem with doing that as an archbishop is that if you're an archbishop, you have responsibilities for pastoral care, for acting as a bridge between people and God, for people across the whole political spectrum. If you begin to identify with one part of that political spectrum, you can't act as an archbishop pastorally for people who disagree with you politically. It's a cardinal error. It's kind of rule 101 for being a priest or a bishop, and he's broken it rather catastrophically.
There's even talk, Gavin, that he might table an amendment to this bill as it goes through the committee stage of the House of Lords, which would be unprecedented for the leader of the Anglican Church to do that.
Well, the trouble is he's made a really serious category error, and he doesn't be able to see past it. The problem is, of course, there are moral issues in immigration. They're really quite complex, and they defeat most of us. Most of us start with the presupposition that either we like borders and we like our nationality, or we don't like borders and we don't like our nationality. But it's not obvious what the moral values, the universal moral values are, though all of us try and work it out. But the Archbishop doesn't have a particularly mature ethical understanding of these issues. He's using political values, and the problem is it's completely inconsistent with his position. If he does table an amendment, he's acting as a politician, not as an archbishop, and probably he ought to resign as an archbishop and stand for election in the House of Commons.
Can I just press you on that a little bit? When you say he doesn't have a mature understanding of this, what do you mean by that?
Well, in the debates that you have on GB News, you'll have people presenting you with two different ethical views about the immigration problem. One comes from the left and one comes from the right. It's a matter of common sense to realise that if it was obvious that there was some form of absolute or, if you like, overwhelming moral solution to this, we would have come up with it as a political community. The fact is there isn't one. If you choose one route, you get certain results. If you choose another route, you get different results. It's not obvious that either are morally or ethically superior, but as Archbishop, he's claiming that he knows that one way is ethically superior, and frankly, I think that's naive.
He also, Gavin, came up with no alternative plan. He says, of course, we've got to stop people crossing the channel, but didn't have a single practical solution and wagged his finger at the government and used words like immoral, which is a very strong word and very strong criticism of a policy.
Well, I'm sorry, and I think that's one of the reasons why he is abusing his position. And I understand that a number of news outlets have asked him what his upper level for immigration would be, which is a perfectly proper question one should ask the political left all the time. And the answer is that they don't give you one because well, for a whole series of reasons they don't give you one. But without giving you one, it's very difficult to take this seriously as a political project because it just suggests open border immigration, which the consequences of which are very serious. But for the Archbishop to do that as well removes from him any claims to be speaking with a Christian voice for the Christian community operating Christian ethics. But that's not what he's doing.
So for you, in a way then, Gavin, this is a nuanced debate, and by wading in like this, Justin Welby is entrenching people further to find division in this rather than reasons to come together. That's part of your frustration.
Yes, I mean, put simply, he's failed to understand the limits, the barriers between the spiritual and the political. This is not because it's easy to always to know where they lie, but he has a responsibility to make some sense of it, because, as I say, if there was a Christian view of this, then if you like, Christians all over the world would be speaking with one voice. The very fact that there isn't a single united ethical Christian voice ought to give him pause to thought that what he's doing is playing politics and not, in fact, interpreting Christianity for people.
You were the former chaplain to the late Queen Elizabeth II. He's always been controversial, Justin Welby, but he wasn't feeling quite as empowered to make these statements when the late Queen was alive. Is it a coincidence that he now feels that he can?
Well, he may feel buoyed up by the success of the coronation as a public event, and perhaps he's entitled to do that. I think everyone who took part is entitled to feel very proud of themselves. But presenting a successful dramatic act for the nation shouldn't be confused with providing powers of analysis and ethical maturity that so far he's not showed any signs of possessing. So if he is conflating one with the other, it would be adding one mistake to another.
If I could ask you just briefly, he's one of 26 bishops in the House of Lords. Is it an abuse, in one sense, Gavin, for him to speak out in this way when the Catholic cardinal, for instance, has no seat in the House of Lords?
Yes, I think it probably is. I mean, we all agree that politics evolve and our political compromises evolve. The fact that the Anglican Church, underrepresented as it is, has these seats in the House of Lords is now an anachronism. And I think it's not just because the Catholics don't, but the fact that none of the religious communities do. I think it's probably time to revisit this. But the fact is, to revisit the Anglican Church's privileged political position would take up so much parliamentary time and debate that it isn't going to happen. Well, in which case, it's all the more incumbent upon the bishops and archbishops there to be careful about how they use and abuse a position. And I'm afraid in this highly charged political context, I think the Archbishop has fallen into abusing his position.
OK, thank you so much. Former chaplain to the late Queen Elizabeth II, Gavin Ashenden.
Really strong. I'd say he's even crosser than me.
What a lovely man.
Very nice
and,
man.
You know,
and he makes the point, it is an abuse.
And to hear somebody like that, so articulate, to talk about the fact that this is blurring the lines between spirituality, morality and politics, that just summed that conversation, that summed up this issue for me better than anything I've heard elsewhere.
And it was an overtly political attack on the government, and that's not his role. And I think you're right about it. I think there was far too much Welby in the coronation, in my view, anyway. But we know he has a very good relationship with the King. That's right. And I think he feels he can walk on water.
Suddenly he can now. He wasn't quite as emboldened when
he should stick to his day job and try and get a few bums on seats in churches, because there aren't very many, and a lot of churches are closing down on his watch because he's not very inspirational. Yeah. And he's also irritating.
He was inspirational.
Yeah,
he makes him want to go to church.
Yeah, Gavin was great.
Still to come, Ukraine's President Zelensky says that he's disappointed that Kyiv wasn't hosting this year's Eurovision Song Contest, but he even went further than that. You want to hear this? It's all after your morning's news with Rhiannon Jones.
Coming up at 11:32, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's widely expected to raise interest rates for a 12th consecutive time in the next half hour as it tries to tackle soaring inflation. Economists predict the base rate will increase by a quarter of a percentage point from 4.25 to 4.5%. The rise would take interest rates to the highest level since 2008. The BBC has found there were no concerns about Richard Sharp's integrity whilst he was chairman of the broadcaster. A BBC Conflicts of Interest review was commissioned following Mr Sharp's resignation from the company in April, after he was found to have breached the rules for public appointments. The committee confirmed it had no concerns in respect of the chairman's integrity whilst in the role. Plaid Cymru has appointed Claire Griffith as interim leader. It follows the resignation of Adam Price last night after a damning report into the Welsh Nationalist Party's culture. The report found the party had failed to implement a zero-tolerance approach to sexual harassment, bullying and misogyny. The appointment will be subject to ratification by the party's National Council on Saturday. And the number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen to a new record high. According to NHS England, an estimated 7.3 million people were waiting to start treatment in March. That's up from 7.2 million in February. It's the highest number since records began in August 2007. TV, online, DAB, digital and tune-in radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2587 and €1.1518. The price of gold is £1,611.94 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,742 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us 4, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11:37. You're with To The Point on GB News. Now, I think we're going to talk to... we've got Stephen and Carol Malone are also here. But... we're talking to you first. But don't go anywhere, because we've got Bucks Fizz.
Yes.
The band.
Making your mind up.
Oh.
Remember that?
You just can't. You can't.
Making your mind up.
You can't
Was that
say Bucks Fizz that, but they're going to be talking to us in just a minute. They're pulling over. They're en route to the Eurovision Song Contest. So don't go anywhere.
You think the four of us could do a Bucks Fizz?
Listen, I want... what did you think of Gavin Ashton's extraordinary interview? We're just talking about Gavin Ashton's extraordinary interview.
I thought it was extraordinary. I think he destroyed the Archbishop of Canterbury in a very kind and loving way, as only a clergyman would. He did it brilliantly. He said exactly what I'm sure everyone out there is thinking. He said he's being partisan. He was being it was left-wing partisanship. Absolutely, and that's not what a man of the cloth should do. He should be appealing to everyone. And
when he talked about a lack of maturity,
yes,
I noticed they've leapt in on it like a striking cannon.
Yes,
I know. A man of 70-odd, he's been Archbishop for a long time. That was a devastating...
I know, to you, I mean, that was really the harpoon.
Yeah, it was. But, of course, he's the leader of the Anglican faith worldwide. So his comments about this country will be echoing all around the world.
Completely.
And it's so unfair because it's making us look like a racist country.
And as we all were talking about before, the Anglican Church is decaying in front of our very eyes. Congregations are dwindling every single day. That's what he should be focusing on. And he's not. He's focusing on politics.
And parts of the Anglican Church are actually booming, the evangelical wing, and very much the sort of the West African wing. But I think Gavin Ashton, as you rightly pointed out, was the chaplain to Queen Elizabeth II.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been fascinating to hear some of the conversations?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I could have talked to him all day. I can see why the Queen picked him. He's fabulous, isn't he?
We should remember this wretched Welby man. They're allocating £100 million of church money. Where do they get that from?
Exactly.
Why shouldn't that be spelt in poor communities? To deal with reparations, to do with the slave trade.
When he was
what a waste of time and money.
As an ex-Etonian, not me, I mean, Oil Wellesby.
I thought you were looking at me. I'm not an Etonian.
Definitely not.
Of course he's an old Etonian.
Yes, he is an Etonian.
I felt like saying it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom.
The old Etonian living in his very nice palace at Lambeth Palace. It's a very nice, very beautiful garden.
He needs to come out of it more often and meet ordinary people.
Squatters in there once, Carol, didn't he?
They did, and he threw them out. There were people who were living there quite a long time, and he got rid. So he's not that.
And we should be asking all those 26 bishops, how many of them have taken in refugees to their
Well, he took some in, and then he got rid.
He did.
The only one who has is Bishop Gary Lineker.
Oh, yeah. There'll be a house at the side of the ground. It won't be in his house.
It's one of his houses.
Right. As we say, we're going to be talking in just a moment to Bucks Fizz in the run-up to the Eurovision Song Contest this weekend. Turns out Andrew Pearce is a massive Eurovision fan, but he watched it with the sound turned down.
I can't listen to the Turkish song and the Cypriot caterwauling their way through it.
So in terms of ABBA and in terms of Bucks Fizz, who's your number one?
ABBA by a mile.
Of course.
I love ABBA. I'm in love with ABBA.
Bucks Fizz might be able to hear us. They're going to talk to them in a minute. They might
but I like Bucks Fizz is too.
Don't forget, when ABBA won, you know where the Eurovision Song Contest
1974,
was?
Brighton.
It was in Brighton. I mean,
It was.
talk about, horses
Yeah.
for
I
courses.
know, it was the dome. I was transfixed by watching ABBA in 1974, and I fell firmly in love with them there and then.
Do you know, every time Pierce and I get together with friends, you can guarantee at the end of the evening, he will stick an ABBA tune, whether we want it on
I
or
know,
not.
I do. And
he
we all
starts
get up dancing.
No, you do.
I do,
And you
that's
get
true.
on the table.
Yeah, I do.
And you destroy furniture.
I do. I knock candles over
You do.
and burn your table.
He burned a whole dining table for me by knocking a candle over.
When Yvette Cooper was going for the leadership, I rewrote Super Trooper as Super Cooper. Love is going to find you. She didn't like it.
No.
Funnily enough.
Because she's anything but super.
Oh, no, she's wonderful.
I like her, but she's not.
So it's obviously in Liverpool this weekend.
Yeah.
But last year, of course, the Ukrainian entrant won.
Yeah.
They were called. It was Kalash's Orchestra. Don't remember it. I'm sure you've got it on repeat in your car. You don't have a car. But Zelensky has now said, therefore, because they won, this year should have been in Ukraine. And Zelensky's come out and he said, I have great respect for the United Kingdom.
So we should.
And it's an amazing country. Well, yes, thank you.
Great respect. He's got great armaments as well.
Yeah.
Right. And he said, but from the start, my opinion has been that if we can't host Eurovision, it should take place in one of the countries that share a border with us, such as Slovakia, Poland, or another country that our people can reach easily.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that the Poles would be too happy with that particular idea. Besides, on the other hand...
It's very expensive. It costs millions to
I know.
stage
Well, look,
Eurovision.
I mean, Ireland went out of their way to lose.
They
having
did.
won it 2 years running. They bankrupted it. But look, the reality is there's only a limited number of people can actually be there in the arena in Liverpool. So, what would have been the equivalent? What a target that would have been. Imagine if it had been just over the border in Poland.
Well,
Putin
would have sent bombs over.
Criticising Zelensky is like criticising David Attenborough.
It is, and we shouldn't be rushing to judgment too soon on this, because I adore Zelensky, but I want to kind of see the context in which you said this. But he should. It's cost us a lot of time and trouble, really. He should have said so before.
Well, I think we've got.
That's right. I think we've got
Buxters now with us. Jay Aston,
Mike Nolan, and Cheryl Baker. All the original members of Buxters.
There they are.
Hi,
Hello.
guys. Great to see you. Great to see you. Where are you?
Looking good.
We don't know. Somewhere in Wales.
We just pulled over to try and get some decent signal.
Very good. Are you on your way to Liverpool? You're on your way to Liverpool?
Yeah. We're on our way, yeah.
Brilliant. And what do your responsibilities involve this weekend? Presumably you're all working there.
Yeah. Well, we've got several concerts. A concert tonight, a concert tomorrow in Liverpool, and then we're back on the final, really just as guests. We did our little sketch the other night on the semi-final, and it was amazing. The show is amazing, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's wonderful.
And I read the other day, it is one of the most seminal moments in Eurovision contest history when you girls ripped your skirts off when you won all those years ago.
No, that's wrong.
Oh.
I ripped the skirts off.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yes,
you
of
did,
course.
Mike.
It's done differently today now. They ripped my trousers.
There you go. There, that's it.
How times have changed. That was considered risque.
You'd get 6 months for that.
Yeah.
Worth it, though.
But guys, just remind us what year that was. And if anybody had told you then that you'd still be heading up the motorway in 2023 to be part of it, would you have believed them?
It was 1845.
It's 42 years ago, actually. 42 years.
Really?
Yeah.
We're going to give up after 5 years. I've got a 5-year career here. 42 years, we're still doing it.
It's amazing. Aren't we lucky?
Yeah.
Mike's still got better hair than Michael Fabricant.
Yeah, Mike, what do you guys think of the British entry this year? What do you think of the UK entry?
Oh, it's great.
It's great,
She's
yeah.
going to do really well, but the opposition is phenomenal. So,
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know.
strong.
I was saying top 5. I think she'll be top 5, but maybe top 10. But we're going to be on the left-hand side of the board this year, for sure.
Right. Who do you think's going to win then?
Ukraine.
I don't know, because I
Followed by
think
Sweden.
Finland in the auditorium is the favourite.
Yeah.
But
And also-
Loreen,
Loreen,
with,
Sweden is fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
and
Ireland's not in it.
No, shame.
Shame. Ireland's not in it.
Spain, Norway, Finland.
Irish,
Yeah.
Irish.
Yeah, they're all
Irish.
I reckon
up there.
Finland might nick it this year.
OK, all right. Well, guys, it's lovely to see you.
You're looking fabulous.
Thank you so much.
You're looking fabulous.
For pulling over on the motorway on the way to Liverpool.
On the road again, yeah.
Yeah. Go careful.
And have a good concert tonight. Well done. Lovely to talk to you guys. See you. Right. Isn't that fabulous?
Great, aren't they?
They're great. I do remember when those skirts came off. It was a great moment, wasn't it?
I just love the fact that they're all still mates. That doesn't happen in the music industry, does it?
What a scoop.
Well, exactly. Are you going to watch? Will you watch it, Carol?
Yes, I will. I mean, I'm a bit fed up with our entry, who keeps on saying
she's
she
hates.
Is it Molly May? Is her name Molly May?
Yeah, she keeps on saying how much she hates Britain and she wants to leave the country. She wants to go and live in Germany. Well, go on then. And why are we letting someone who hates our country represent us?
I know. And she said that Boris Johnson shouldn't have been given a bed in hospital while he was seriously ill from COVID.
It's like, you know.
But Andrew, back in the summer of '97, in the spring '97, I was asked to come on a television programme to talk about our great triumph, and I naturally thought that they were talking about the Labour victory in the general election.
The landslide.
They wanted to talk about Katrina and the Waves, who actually won Eurovision.
That was the last time we won.
Who was brilliant.
Yes, and that was the last time we won, I think.
I know. Yeah, but so I was there talking about the great red wave sweeping over the country. They wanted to talk about Katrina.
Now, we want to get some more opinions out of you two before we wrap up. We've got a slightly shorter show today because we've got this interest rates announcement about midday. We've got Liam Halligan and Mark Golonka is going to be in position to bring you that. But before you go, let's have a chat at what else we've got here. Let's have a look at what else we've got here. Carol, do you want to talk about Bridgerton actress?
I do.
Joa Ando. This is the lady, was on TV at the ITV post-coronation and said that the balcony was terribly white.
I couldn't believe it. I've met this woman on a couple of occasions there, and I was stunned when she actually said she'd been talking about how diverse the coronation had been, which it had
was.
Been. Yeah. And then she said that when the family came out on the balcony, it was terribly white. Well, of course it was terribly white because they're an all-white family. And she seemed to be suggesting there was something offensive about that, and it made me furious. Now, it didn't just make me furious. Ofcom has had 4,100 and whatever complaints. The most complained about comments so far this year, which I'm not surprised at. But, people like this lady have to realise that this is a predominantly white country.
Yeah.
And get over it. And the royal family went to enormous lengths, and so does this country generally, to be diverse, to be inclusive, and the coronation particularly.
You had a black gospel choir.
Black gospel choir, the female bishops, the black bishops, and all of that.
You have a Greg Dykes to talk about the BBC being hideously white.
Yes.
I tell you one person who'll be delighted with this. I think a viewer in Montecito, California, will immediately say, I told you so.
Well, if she hadn't flounced off to America, she could have been on the balcony with her husband.
But can you imagine if a white person had said that about a black event? It said it was hideously black. I mean, there would be hell to pay. Racism works both ways. And I just think this was an appalling comment to make. Ofcom are saying they don't know yet whether they're going to investigate. Surely they have to investigate. If they've had 4,000 complaints, they have to investigate. But why would you say that on a day, on a happy day? Why?
Stating the obvious.
The bleedingly
obvious.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, she's not a flibber to gibbet chip. She's a woman of...
She's an intelligent
mature
woman.
years, and she's a bright, intelligent woman.
Yes.
And she said after, I was a bit tired of it. But the point is, sometimes you reveal your true feelings on occasion.
Yes. And what did she expect the royal family to do? Wheel a person of colour to tag them onto the end to make it look inclusive? Someone who wasn't a member of the family.
Put some polish on their face?
Well, I mean, that's, it's just...
Steady on, Andrew.
It's an outrageous
We're in Lenny
thing.
Henry. Yeah.
It's an outrageous thing to say.
It's such a shame, though, because we've come so far.
Yes, we have.
We could have black panellists here would tell you that they've had a tough... Diane Abbott, I mean, we talk about, she represents such a difficult time she had to get into that state in politics. We've come so far, and when somebody comes out and says statements like this, when they see everything through the prism of melanin, it's so disappointing because it causes more division.
And especially when people...
Melanin, that's such a brilliant expression.
Do you like that?
That's fabulous. Can I steal it?
Thanks, Stephen. You can have that. But it is about melanin.
It is great.
It's just about the melanin in your skin.
It's under the skin that really matters.
But I think, don't you think that this country tries really hard?
Yes.
I think we try really hard with equality and with diversity.
Yeah.
And this was just an excuse to have a crack at white people.
Very disappointing.
And it just shouldn't...
And she was probably only on as a commentator because of her skin colour.
Of course, exactly.
And she's playing a member of the aristocracy in Bridgerton anyway.
Yes.
She is, which I've never watched, by the way.
Yes, I have. It's very
Right. We've come to the end of our show. We've come to the end of the week for Andrew and I. Thank you so much to Stephen Pound and Carol Malone. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst.
We're going to get that revelation about interest rates coming up very soon. So that's it from us.
Yeah. Have a great weekend.
See you soon.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with your GB News forecast, brought to you by the Met Office. Sunny spells for many of us today, but interspersed by heavy showers, and once again the threat of thunderstorms and some hail as well. Low pressure, a relatively slack area of low pressure, is sitting over the UK. It's slow moving. There are light winds circulating around this, so any showers that do bubble up through the day will be slow moving, and that's why there's a thunderstorm warning in force for eastern parts of the UK, because here these slow-moving showers could cause some impacts. Of course, given the slow-moving nature of the showers, some places will avoid the showers altogether and stay dry and bright, so especially western Scotland. That's where the finest weather will be, and temperatures fairly widely across the UK, close to average for the time of year, mid to high teens generally. The showers continue going into the evening for a few hours, but then after dark they do disappear quite quickly. Then it turns drier, but also generally cloudier, with some low cloud drifting in from the east and becoming fairly extensive. Western areas will avoid the cloud with some breaks and temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures. But where we've got the low cloud, it's a grey and chilly start to Friday. Some drizzle coming along for East Anglia and the southeast for a time.